London is an ever-evolving city, and as one landmark goes up, another building bites the dust. In this series, we're going to be tracking down some of its hidden gems and celebrating some of the places that may not be around for much longer. In today's programme, I'll be finding out the hidden story of this children's play hut in Peckham and peering into the history of this fabulous old shop in North London. But first, we're turning the clock back to the days of Churchill and the war. The Second World War left its imprints all over London, blitzed out buildings, air raid shelters and gun emplacements. But many of them have disappeared as new buildings go up and old ones come down. But if you know where to look, there are still some wartime survivors hanging on in the most unlikely places. Like Neasden in North London. They're supposed to be somewhere around here. It's not one of these terraced houses, surely. The place I've come to see is difficult to find, but there's a good reason for that. Aha, mind your heads, this is it. This door marks the entrance to one of London's best-kept wartime secrets. But before we have a look around, let me take you back to those dark days just before the outbreak of war. As the capital braced itself for conflict, Londoners set to work, preparing for the threat of air raids. The government decided to build an underground bunker in Whitehall known as the Cabinet War Rooms. This would serve as Churchill's HQ if official buildings were destroyed by bombing. But even the Cabinet War Rooms wouldn't have survived a direct hit. So a second bunker was built, at Neasden in North London. Its code name was Paddock. From the street, the only evidence that Paddock exists is this metal door. But once you're inside, a whole hidden world opens up before you. To guide me through the maze of passageways, I've enlisted an expert guide. Nick Catford's had a long love affair with underground places like this. I say, Nick, this is an amazingly atmospheric old place.
Oh, it certainly is. This is actually the point where we enter the bunker proper. We're going through an airlock now. You can see the thickness of the walls, because the bunker had to be totally self-sufficient. If there was a gas attack, it had to be totally sealed so that everybody down here could be completely safe and able to fulfil their function.
Wow, Nick, this is quite a size for a building that you wouldn't expect to see under the suburban streets of Neasden.
It surprises everybody. The thing is about this bunker, nobody knew it was being built. Work started in 1939. It took 18 months to build, but it was built at night on an existing government site. This was the site of the Post Office Research Station. They were doing government work, so nobody asked what was going on. And if you asked in those days, it was certainly bad news. Even the king...
Careless words cost lives.
Indeed they did. Even the king didn't know that this bunker was being built until it was completed. It's amazing.
Yeah. And what have been going on in the rooms we're passing?
Well, unfortunately, records haven't been kept, so we don't know what went on in many of these offices, but I can tell you that hatch there, that goes to the kitchen.
I say. 2 teas and a Chelsea bun, please. The kitchen was on the upper level of the bunker, but the really important work went on much deeper than that. Oh, I don't like it. Yeah, this really is getting subterranean now.
Well, the point is that at this level we were supposed to be able to withstand the largest high-explosive bomb that the Germans could deliver in 1940. Right, at this point we're 40 feet below ground.
Sorry, I should have brought my flippers.
Turn to your left there. And you see before you the generator room. The bunker was totally self-sufficient. That was the whole point of it, totally self-sufficient. So if the main supply was lost, then it still had to be able to operate. So we've got the diesel generator here, we've got the controls for the generator.
Looks a bit like something you see in one of those old science fiction movies. Yeah.
Everything in this room is the original plant when the bunker was built. Through here is the military hub of the bunker. This is the reason the bunker existed. This is the military control room, operations room, map room, call it what you like. There would have been maps on the walls here. You'll notice these fluorescent fittings. Now, fluorescent lighting was around in the 30s, but these shades angle the light onto these maps. And this is where the war in Europe, the war would have been run from this room.
Those lovely girls with the big map of Europe pushing boats and
that's
tanks
exactly.
and all that. Yeah.
You normally think of a map table with people with pushing tanks around on sticks and a gallery overlooking. That's the equivalent room here.
And what's this? I've noticed the only room that has any windows.
Well, instead of the gallery, this room actually has offices overlooking the map room through windows, actually on the same level. So we've got 3 rooms, one for the Admiralty, one for the Army, and one for the Air Ministry, looking into the map room.
No photographs survive of Paddock during the war, but these pictures of its twin, the Cabinet War Rooms, show what it must have looked like. Next door to the map room was the place where Churchill would have met with his closest colleagues.
That small room through there is where Churchill would have broadcast to the nation had it been needed, but this is the main government hub of the bunker. This is the Cabinet Office. This is where the War Cabinet would have met. There would have been a big oval table. Churchill would have sat in the middle, about here. In fact, he only came once to this bunker. He chaired one Cabinet meeting on the 3rd of October 1940 for the sole purpose of proving that the bunker was able to fulfil its function.
Churchill later recorded the events of the day in his memoirs. We held a cabinet meeting at Paddock, far from the light of day, and each minister was required to inspect and satisfy himself about his sleeping and working apartments. We celebrated this occasion with a vivacious luncheon, and then we returned to Whitehall. It would be Churchill's one and only visit to this extraordinary place.
He wanted to stay in central London, so this bunker only remained operational for 3 years. In 1943, a new standby Cabinet War Room was opened in South West 1 in Marsham Street. Paddock was abandoned, the government moved back to South West 1, and this bunker was forgotten.
But that one doesn't, that still doesn't exist?
That one, unfortunately, under the Home Office building, was demolished 3 years ago, so that's gone.
Paddock hasn't quite disappeared like Marsham Street, but in the years since the end of the war, it's slowly decayed. What do you do with a huge underground bunker in Neasden? But I'm glad I've had the chance to walk through these deserted corridors of power and follow in the footsteps of the great man himself, even if Churchill did only make one visit. Well, you can understand why Winston didn't exactly love the place. It's cold, it's damp, and it's really rather gloomy. But had things turned out differently, this would have been the very place that Winston and his generals would have been planning out the final days of the war. It's an amazing piece of our wartime history, a huge underground white elephant slumbering beneath the streets of Neasden. Not all of London's wartime secrets are buried beneath the streets. This is Peckham Rye Park in South London. Today it's somewhere where the locals come to enjoy a stroll in the sun. And tucked away in a corner near the car park are these unassuming huts. Not normally the sort of thing you take a second look at. They're hardly beautiful, and they're in a pretty ropey state of repair. A couple of them are used for storage. That one over there is the changing room for the local Sunday football team, and the red one down there is used as a children's playgroup. But during the war, this corner of the park would have been strictly out of bounds to the local kids. Sometimes the most unlikely places have the most interesting stories to tell, as Maureen discovered when she took over the job of running the kids' play club here 4 years ago. Hi there, Maureen.
Hello.
How you doing?
Fine, thanks.
You run this wonderful playroom here.
Yes, I do.
But this building wasn't always used for kids, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was used for a prisoner of war camp in 1945.
How strange. And yet some people might say today, that's the right place for modern kids. Can we have a look inside?
Yeah, sure, come in.
Maureen's hut may not be much to look at, but it's recently been listed because of its historic significance. That means Maureen has to treat it with care. So Maureen, when did you find out that this had been a prisoner of war camp?
I didn't know it was a prisoner of war camp till about 3 years ago, when parents come up and say to me, did you know this is a prisoner of war camp? I said, no, I didn't. So I said, where were they from? They said, Germany or something like that, so I really didn't know.
And did that change your attitude to the building?
No, I didn't change my attitude to the building, no, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm here for the children, you know, so I didn't change my attitude now.
And does it surprise you that such a humble-looking building is a listed building?
It does surprise me because it really looks, you know, it needs to be knocked down, you know, so it does really surprise me, yeah. We're limited to what we can do to the wall because when I put up displays and things like that, we cannot, like, pierce the walls. We have to put blue tack or we have to put strings or something like that. We're limited to what we can do to the actual building, you know?
And does it ever cross your mind what those times must have been like when this was for the prisoners and all? Did you ever think about that?
Yeah, because sometimes I look and I say, where did they used to sleep? Or something like that. I keep looking around and say, were they in that corner, you know? Have there been dead ones there? Have they, you know?
It is hard to imagine, isn't it? All these poor fellas from hundreds of miles from home.
Yeah.
Living in what is now obviously a very joyful building, but if you took all this away, it'd be a pretty barren and grim room.
Personally, I wouldn't stay in here at night by myself because I don't know what went on in here, so I wouldn't.
Coming up later, I find out what life was like for the wartime prisoners of Peckham. And discover why this lady prefers shopping the old-fashioned way.
It wasn't all this ridiculous, you know, after August bank holiday you start buying for Christmas and that kind of nonsense.
Tucked away in a quiet corner of this Peckham Park are these modest-looking huts. They're nothing much to look at. In fact, they're a bit of an eyesore. But they do have a remarkable story to tell. In the Second World War, they were used to hold German and Italian prisoners of war. To help Maureen and me get a better idea of what life was like for the men who lived here, we've invited along Roger Thomas, who's an expert on places like this. Roger, just the man we need. Maureen and I were just discussing how hard it is to imagine what it might have been like for a prisoner of war at the time when it was built.
Well, you've got to cast your mind back, really, because, I mean, imagine this empty, basically. Take away all the walls, and lying down either side, you'd have had bunk beds. Small cupboards about this high, and then at either end, in the corners, you had pot-belly stoves. That was the only heating they had.
Well, there still is a stove down there, and a washing machine and a fridge.
Yeah, just by the ironing board. That's exactly where it would have been. Very basic, very Spartan, but it was warm, it was comfortable, and the prisoners themselves, when they first came here, probably actually built it.
So what were they doing here?
Well, this particular site isn't strictly a prisoner war camp. It's too small. But before the prisoners were here, there was an anti-aircraft battery, part of the inner London anti-aircraft zone. And there you had soldiers initially, and they were in timber huts a little bit further behind us. Then they moved out, and the batteries were moved, and they decided that this site was available. We had prisoners, and we needed people to do work, so they came here. Initially, they would have been Italians, but probably over time there would have been Germans here as well. And these men who were here would have been trustees. There would have been no guards. They would have been on their own, looking after themselves and running their camp as such, which is really in this hostel, 4 huts, themselves.
Okay, so basically, you know, they were prisoners, but in a way they wasn't really prisoners because they were really free to do whatever they wanted to do to a certain extent. Or...
It was for their own benefit. If they worked hard and proved themselves, then they were much more likely to be repatriated quicker.
Okay.
But on top of that, lots of these people had nowhere to go to when they went back. So they saw their future actually in this country. So again, they wanted to prove themselves. So generally, they worked extremely hard, and very rarely did anybody try and make a runner.
Yeah. Do you know if any of them are still alive?
For you being here, you never know. If you get an old gentleman walking around looking rather curiously at the hut sometime, ask if he is.
I will,
because you'll be surprised. Quite often, they do come back to see where they stayed. I know one site where the chap came back and he actually took a pane of glass out the window, because that was the window he looked out of every morning, and he actually took it back to Germany with him.
Memento.
Very extraordinary, yeah. So if you've got a pane of glass missing tomorrow, you know.
No, these are all double glazing. They're all these are all up to date.
The huts were designed to be put up in a hurry, probably by the prisoners themselves. They were made using cheap building materials, including hollow bricks. But then there was a war on, and everyone was expected to pull their weight, prisoners included. Rogers brought along an aerial photograph which was taken during the war.
That's the hut we've just been in.
And I'm seeing a bit of sort of agriculture going on.
Oh yeah,
in the park.
not enough. That whole area is thousands of plots, all across there, behind those trees, right along, following the road, all the way up, right to the point. You can see.
Spuds and cabbages.
Yeah, there've been loads and loads of allotments. So digging for victory.
60 years on, and the future of these huts hangs in the balance. The council is considering plans to replace them with something more up to date and provide better facilities for the local park users. This concrete Colditz can hardly be described as beautiful, and you'd think that most of the locals round here would be quite happy to see it replaced with something a little easier on the eye. But you'd be wrong. They've launched a campaign to save it. That may be a bit of a long shot, and some of the hut's days are probably numbered. But Maureen's hut may still beat the bulldozers now that it's been given listed status. Whatever happens to them in the future, I wonder what the men who spent their wartime here would make of the fact that their prefab prisons have survived for so long. My next stop is North London. A single, please, to Muswell Hill. 200 years ago, this was a green and pleasant retreat, far away from the hustle and bustle of the capital below. But as London's population grew, the city gradually spread northwards up the hill. Most of the buildings which make this such a pleasant place to live today went up in 2 decades before the First World War. Because it happened so quickly, the buildings all went up in a planned and coherent way which is almost unheard of in London. And at the heart of this new development, they built sweeping parades of shops like this one, called the Broadway. Most of the premises have changed hands many times since then, of course. Like most other high streets in London, the Broadway is the usual mix of big national chains, plus a few independent outfits. But there is one survivor of those early years, a business that's been run by the same family ever since the time of that late Victorian building boom.
No, well, I didn't.
Hi there, William. Hi. What a lovely old shop. Really is like going back in time.
It is, yes. It's W. Martin's of Muswell Hill, and we opened in 1897, so it's been in the same family for nearly 110 years now.
You don't look anything like 110, though.
No, I joined the family business in 1984. Joined father, who was here then. But,
so it's been one continuous line, yeah?
One continuous line, yes, since great-grandfather. Mm.
So how much of this lovely old-looking shop is original?
Most of it is original. Solid oak, mahogany oak counter is all original. But at one point in the 30s, it was cut off at the end here when refrigeration started to come into the shops, and we actually had a fridge there. But when the war days came along, things like that sort of disappeared for a time, and
that bit of cut off.
We had saved the old counter, and it's shifted back in again.
It's come back again. Wherever you look in this place, you can see reminders of what shopping used to be like for Londoners before the days of supermarkets and the disposable throwaway society. And what's this, an old ammunition tin?
No, these are tins which our biscuits used to be delivered in. This one is golden brandy snaps, and they would then relabel it and fill it up again and bring it back the following week with some more biscuits in. And we now use them for storing our coffee in. Nice and handy.
The fixtures and fittings haven't changed much from the days when the shop first opened for business. From the mahogany cabinets to the bell, which summoned fresh stock from the storeroom. It's an odd feeling back here. I feel like the naughty kid is going to get a slap in a minute. I'm backstage in the sweet shop.
You are indeed, yes.
And if the customers couldn't make it to the shop, that didn't mean they had to go hungry. Long before the days of internet shopping, Martin's had a home delivery service. Look at this lovely thing we found. W. Martin, high-class family grocer, established 1897, and my favourite bit here, price list subject to market fluctuations. It was the catalogue that went to their customers. And really, you could get absolutely everything you needed, from brooms and brushes to meat and fish pastes, the ubiquitous soups, of course, canned fruits, disinfectants, hot chocolate, I wonder, how much would carpet soap cost in the 1930s? 9p. And at the beginning here, we've actually got general groceries in alphabetical order. And if we just look at the bees, we've got everything from baking powder to barley, bath bricks, beeswax, bengers. Can you still get a benger? I'm not sure you can. Bicarbonate of soda, 6D. And not only that, we've got birdseed, we've got 4 different kinds. You can have mixed, parrot, canary or love. I wonder what you use the love birdseed for. Bisco rye, bisto, boot polishers, black lead, and on and on and on. So presumably this place had a tiny little corridor of space between all the goods that were stacked up to the ceiling. It's hardly surprising that a place like this has plenty of regular customers. But none of them can match the loyalty of their longest-serving shopper who recently celebrated her 100th birthday. Hetty first stepped through the door here more than 70 years ago. What, Hetty, are your earliest memories of coming in here?
Oh, the lovely smell of coffee.
Which is still here, fortunately, yeah?
Yes. And Christmas time, I think, as far as I can recall, the wives of the 2 brothers used to come and help out. The shop was very, very, very busy. Not months before Christmas like now. It wasn't all this ridiculous, you know, after August bank holiday you start buying for Christmas and that kind of nonsense. But, you know, from December onwards you did. And they would come and help out.
And how does it feel to you, Hetty, to know that this place has survived?
Lovely. Lovely. I wish more of the family shops had survived.
Places like Martin's are disappearing every week. Retail's a cutthroat business and there's little room for sentiment in the modern high street. But William's confident that after a century of customer service, his family firm has a rosy future.
I think it'll just go on as it is now, really. I have a young son. He hopefully may want to take it over one day. He's 5 at the moment. But we'll continue as we are. And hopefully we will remain in the Broadway and remain successful.
Next time on Disappearing London, I've got an appointment at the barber's. Had a good day at work today, sir? I'll be stargazing in Hampstead. So is this the original telescope? Yeah. And cooking up a storm in an East End kitchen. Don't mind, they'll get sent back.